So you know what frustrates me? I still feel like we're too trustworthy. There's still a lot about this world that we need answers about. We just don't know, that are mysterious and that we've been lied to about. All kind of different things, right? It's just mind blowing to know the mysteries and different perils of this world and the people in it. A lot of whom we've placed our faith and trust. Don't believe me? Let's get into some unexplained mysteries that'll give you chills then. Let's go.
These strange, unsolved mysteries have baffled investigators, researchers, and experts. Some may be close to being solved, while others still need crucial information before the truth can be revealed. Others may forever remain a mystery. Number 10. There have been many instances of strange and mysterious objects appearing in images of the night sky. Most of these can be explained away by natural phenomena like planets or optical illusions, while others are man-made. But the case of 9 strange dots of light captured by an observatory in California is harder to explain. Starting in November of 1949, the Palomar Sky Survey was a project conducted by scientists at the Palomar Observatory in California. Over the course of 9 years, the scientists used a telescope to capture almost 2,000 images of the night sky on photographic plates. Each part of the night sky was captured at least twice, once on a plate focused on red light, and again on a plate focused on blue light. Only a small fraction of the sky was captured during the project, and each plate could only capture roughly 36 square degrees. The project has since been used for educational purposes and as part of larger astronomical catalogs. In more recent years, the plates were analyzed by a project called VASCO. The project is focused on uncovering objects that suddenly disappeared or appeared in observations. According to the project, roughly 100 of these objects, referred to as transient objects, have been found. The most mysterious of these 9 were captured on a single plate by the Palomar Sky Survey in 1950. The 9 specks of light appeared in the sky over California on April 12, 1950. Like with all images captured by the Palomar Sky Survey, the one that captured the 9 objects was part of a pair. The first image was captured on a blue light plate and seemed to show nothing out of the ordinary. The next was captured roughly 30 minutes later on a red light plate and showed 9 objects that hadn't been there previously. The objects looked the same as other stars. They were clustered together in an area of the sky that would appear less than a third of the size of the moon. Other than this, there didn't seem to be any discernible pattern between the dots. They varied in size and brightness. Some appeared close to other stars, while others were by themselves in the night sky. At the time, the objects weren't noticed or paid too much attention. There would have been countless photographs taken, and noticing these small changes between different photographs would have been an entirely different project than the Palomar Sky Survey. But when VASCO came across the images, it piqued the interest of scientists. When the scientists turned their telescopes to that patch of the night sky, they found that the stars still weren't present. It seems that they were never seen again, and only captured during this one photograph. There are a few different explanations for what could cause transient objects, but none of them fit the evidence. Something like an asteroid breaking up, or meteoroids hitting the Earth's atmosphere, would show streaks across the images due to the exposure time. They wouldn't be pinpoint dots. An asteroid breaking up would also have been visible in the image taken directly before this one, but nothing was found. The same streaks would be seen if the lights had been caused by airplanes passing overhead. Rare astronomical events like gamma-ray bursts or fast radio bursts could explain one of the dots, but these don't happen regularly enough for 9 to be captured simultaneously. The odds of multiple bursts occurring in the same patch of the night sky in the same time period are negligible. Researchers considered the possibility that contaminants might explain the strange images. Radioactive contaminants from nuclear testing were ruled out, as that would have left artifacts over the entire image, not just in this one small section. Something.
Why do we always try to run from what we actually are thinking it is. Why do we do that? You know how much time we exert, and it's just exhausting, fam. We waste a lot of time doing that.
Like saliva or droplets from a sneeze might have been possible, although experiments with this showed that the droplets would have been more elongated than the specks seen on camera. The closest match to what was captured in the mysterious image was caused by satellites on a geosynchronous orbit. These are satellites with an orbital time of day which remain roughly in the same location above Earth, which means that they wouldn't streak in the image. But the photograph was taken years before the first man-made satellites reached orbit. The 9 transient objects remain a fascinating mystery. They could have a simple explanation, or be a sign of something more mysterious waiting to be discovered. Number 9. To most people, buried treasure is nothing more than a trope of fiction. There have been some instances where mysterious caches of gold and other precious items have been discovered, or rumors of treasure buried in a specific location spread over centuries. One of these rumors focuses on a Los Angeles neighborhood and park called Elysian Park, which may be home to $1 million worth of gold and treasure. The story of the Elysian Park treasure started almost 180 years ago, during the Mexican-American War. The area that is today Los Angeles was then a collection of Mexican pueblos in the desert. Those living near the area of Elysian Park were supposedly wealthier than average. When they heard that American forces were moving in on the area, there was rush to get away. Some residents dug tunnels in order to escape, fearing that they would be met with violence by the invading forces. According to the legend of the Elysian Park treasure, many people buried their valuables in order to keep them safe. Presumably, they were too big or too heavy to carry, as the Angelinos ran. After the war was settled, most of the residents would have returned to their previous homes and reclaimed their hidden possessions. But the theory of the treasure states that some never returned, either passing away before it was safe to do so, or deciding to move out of the area after it came under American control. One of the people who's said to have buried treasure in Elysian Park was cattle rancher Francisco Avila, who lived until 1832. During his life, he collected about $100,000 in coins and jewels, and decided to bury it in the canyons that would one day become the park. He passed away not long after the treasure was buried, as did the man who helped him do so. His wife knew the location, but it was years before she decided she needed to uncover this hidden wealth, and when she tried to dig up the cache, she couldn't find it. According to an article published just 60 years after Avila passed away, his wife passed on information about the treasure to a local girl, and news of it spread. For decades, treasure hunters have been trying to find the treasure of Avila and other settlers. Among them were 2 young men who contacted treasure hunter Roy Rausch to help them. According to them, their father had been searching for the buried treasure before, and they wanted to finish his work. While searching, Rausch found stones and strange carvings, which he believed to be indicators that treasure was nearby. One stone that was found seemed to be a map of the area, with holes drilled into locations where the treasure might be. A tunnel was uncovered, and Rausch's metal detector indicated that something could be found there. But all he found was some rope and batteries. He believed that it was a sign that someone else had already been hunting for the treasure here. Other treasure hunters have found similar stone carvings while out looking for the mysterious Elysian Park hoard, but none have found anything of value. Digging in the park is forbidden without a permit, which officials are reluctant to give out. They say it's unlikely that anything is buried there, but if it is, it belongs to the local authorities. An investigation by the TV show Unsolved Mysteries in the 1990s showed that there was evidence of many tunnels beneath the surface of Elysian Park, and signs of metal objects. That doesn't necessarily mean there's a hidden hoard there, as escape tunnels were built during the war, but it does seem that there's more to this mystery than simple rumors. Number 8. On Halloween night, 1995, Shanna Yaros and a few friends gathered to celebrate at her apartment. Just hours after they'd all left for the night, someone attacked Shanna and left her there for her landlady to find. Almost 30 years on from this disturbing crime, Shanna's case remains an unsolved mystery. Shanna was just 18 years old when she was attacked. She was the oldest child of Dwayne and Debbie Yaros, and had lived in the small town of Nokomis, Illinois, her entire life. Just a few months before the attack, she graduated from high school and was looking into a career in nursing. She wanted to help people and was trying to decide between becoming a pediatric nurse or someone who worked with Alzheimer's patients. She already had a job at a nursing home and was gaining experience. Shanna was just starting a new chapter in her life. She'd suddenly moved out of her parents' home into an apartment she shared with another woman. Her parents were surprised that she had chosen to move out and had been asking her to come back, but Shanna seemed to be enjoying her new independence. Despite that small problem, she still seemed to get along with her parents. In fact, there didn't seem to be anybody she had any serious problems with, which only made what happened even more mysterious. Shanna, her roommate Tanya, her roommate's boyfriend, and a neighbor gathered at Shanna's apartment on Halloween night. It doesn't seem to have been a major party. That evening, her father brought Shanna's younger brother Stefan around so he could go trick-or-treating. Stefan noticed that Tanya and her boyfriend were drinking beer, but the four people were simply sitting around a table. From outside, Shanna's father saw her looking out the window at the car. Normally, he would put the car dome light on and wave to her, but he chose not to this time, and this would be the last time he saw her alive. The only information we have about what happened at that party came from Stefan, who quickly left with his father. According to Shanna's friends, they left at about midnight and nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. Just before 7 a.m. the following morning, Shanna's landlady, who lived next door, noticed her front door was slightly ajar. She called through the door to make sure everything was okay, but when Shanna didn't respond, the landlady looked in and found Shanna's body on the floor. She was fully clothed and partially covered by a duvet, and she had multiple wounds from a bladed weapon. The nature of the crime was very over the top, and police initially told the press they didn't believe this had been a random act of violence. It seemed likely that Shanna knew her attacker. There was no sign of a break-in, meaning Shanna likely let the attacker in. It didn't seem like she'd gotten far after answering the door before she was attacked. The time of the attack was calculated to be around 4 a.m. At 4:46 a.m., a neighbor heard scuffling and movement coming from Shanna's apartment.
So who would you feel comfortable around at 4-something in the morning, right? It's got to either be a boyfriend or a roommate, right? Because we're all suspecting that little group of friends or boyfriend that was there from one of the friends, right? It got to be pointing to one of them. At least probability-wise. Right? It still could be somebody else that wasn't there or somebody else that she knew, but y'all were, as soon as they started mentioning the friend and the boyfriend was there and they were drinking beers, I instantly, antennas went up. Did anybody else's? Because I started thinking about them.
I didn't hear any screaming or anything that would indicate an attack. In the first 18 months of the investigation, 100 tips were called in, and roughly 200 pieces of evidence were cataloged. Unfortunately, none of those led the police to any suspects. The 3 friends who'd been with Shanna that night were all questioned and cleared, but Shanna's father claimed that they all left the state almost immediately. Shanna's family and the police have continued to appeal for information. A $10,000 reward for information leading to an arrest was offered. Any information in this case should be passed on to the Illinois State Police at 217-324-6216 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-352-0136.
What's also crazy is I would have asked, and I know they probably did, I'm not trying to say they didn't do their job, but asking the landlord, was there any type of break-in force on the door, something like that, you know? The door was left open, which is crazy too. You would think if it was one of the roommates, they would have shut the door, locked it, you know, if of course they had keys. So you think about that type of stuff, and it's weird. That's what makes me think of like one of the roommates' boyfriend, because they probably didn't have a way to lock the door. They thought they did, shut the door, and it didn't, which left it open or something like that. You didn't hear probably somebody kick down the door. To me, and which is odd, why do you leave the state afterwards if you didn't do anything wrong? I get it, the heat is probably on you, but you had to know that would make you look suspicious.
Number 7. For decades, GPS has played a crucial role in aviation navigation. It's allowed planes to take more direct or efficient routes that might otherwise be impossible, using only traditional navigation tools. but it's remarkably easy for GPS signals to be jammed, either accidentally or intentionally for whatever reason. In October of 2022, a strange signal jamming hit planes flying around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. The actual jamming only lasted 24 hours, though it was 44 hours before air traffic control was able to reset and recover its system, and for flights to continue normally in the area. A year and a half later, the person or people responsible remains a mystery. There are many incidents of signal jamming that occur in the United States. Most of them aren't nefarious in any way. People who monitor GPS signals from airplanes report regular interference patterns in some parts of the country, which occur only on weekdays and not during vacation periods. It's assumed that these are in some way linked to military electronic warfare training or tests. Normally, the Federal Aviation Administration will issue warnings if something like this is going to happen, but sometimes the interference expands further than was expected. This didn't seem to be the explanation on the evening of October 17, 2022, when the FAA issued an advisory to pilots in the area around Dallas Airport. The advisory warned that there were GPS anomalies that were dramatically impacting GPS signals in the area. The warning specified that this was not planned, and it was unknown how long this would last. Thankfully, this mysterious incident wasn't too much of a danger for pilots and aircraft in the area. Modern aircraft don't only rely on GPS alone, and other systems are in place to make sure planes land safely in their intended destinations. Sometimes this doesn't always happen. In 2019, a passenger plane almost crashed after its GPS became unusable on approach to Idaho's Friedman Memorial Airport. Visual navigation was difficult due to smoke and haze in the area, and the plane almost collided with a mountain due to the GPS signal being off. This time, the skies were clear, and planes were able to take off and land at the airport like normal. Only one runway had to be closed during the mysterious event. News of the signal jamming was picked up by the media, but there was little information for anybody to go on. On October 18th, the FAA announced that the issue had resolved itself, and the signal jamming was no longer a problem. Since then, there's been no answer to the mystery of who was behind this strange event. Analysis by experts at Stanford University used publicly available data to try to narrow down a possible location or locations of the devices that had jammed the signal. There are various websites that track GPS signals from aircraft and can tell when the accuracy of the data is low. It was through websites like these that the public was able to get information on this and other signal jamming events, but the data is limited, and researchers found that events like aerobatic displays would screw the results. Accounting for this, the researchers were able to suggest a potential geographical location for the origin of the mystery, but that wouldn't necessarily explain who was behind it or why. Number 6. One of the biggest mysteries in astronomy doesn't come from the furthest reaches of space, but at the heart of our own solar system. For decades, scientists have been trying to solve the puzzle known as the coronal heating problem. All the energy emitted by the sun is produced deep within its core by the process of nuclear fusion. That energy is released in the form of light and heat. Logic would state that the surface of the sun would be hotter than the space around it, as the surface would be closer to where the heat energy was produced. The surface of the sun is an incredible 6,000 degrees Celsius, but the sun's corona is an amazing 1 million degrees. The corona is the upper atmosphere of the sun. It's much dimmer than the surface and can only be seen during a solar eclipse, when a crown-like halo is visible behind the moon. Because it's so hard to study the corona, it wasn't until relatively recently that scientists learned of this puzzling phenomenon. In 1943, scientists using data gathered during solar eclipses and special equipment designed to study the corona were able to calculate just how hot it really was. The discovery seemed to go against the laws of thermodynamics. Heat always transfers from regions of higher temperature to regions of lower temperature, but the measurements seemed to indicate that the opposite was happening, that heat was going from the cooler surface to the hotter corona. Scientists concluded that this couldn't be happening, and there had to be some other way that the corona was so much hotter than the sun's surface. Trying to solve that mystery has been the work of decades. Many theories have been put forward, but as more research has been done into the star, they've mostly proven incorrect. There are a few theories that are yet to be disproven. One of the theories involves magnetic waves bringing the energy from the sun's surface into the upper atmosphere. The sun's magnetic field doesn't resemble the simple field that exists on Earth and other planets. It's much more complicated, with different loops and fields interacting with one another in strange ways. When two magnetic fields that point in opposite directions touch, they release a lot of energy in something called a magnetic reconnection. It's possible that this energy is then converted into heat energy, which is what's causing the high temperature in the atmosphere. More recently, scientists have discovered fast-moving magnetic waves that exist on the sun's surface. These are another potential source of the heat, as they would be a more consistent source of energy. Alternatively, it could be something called nanoflares. Typical solar flares could contribute to the corona's heating, but they don't happen often enough to produce the level of heat seen here. But nanoflares, which are much smaller, are believed to happen much more often. More and more data is collected every day. There are many ways that heat could get into the corona, and it's possible that there's more than one explanation for this mystery. But the difficulties with studying the sun from a distance means that for now, the real answer remains unknown. Number 5. In February of 2024, big parts of 2 unsolved mysteries were finally resolved, but there's still work to be done before justice is served. The case began on January 1st, 1975. That was the last time Oscar James Ned was heard from. Oscar was born in Georgia in 1951 as one of 7 children. He did well in school and moved to White Plains, New York to try to make a better life for himself. He had dreams of becoming a reporter and worked 2 jobs to try to pay for college.
I'm sorry, y'all. The reason why my eyes got so big because I too once attempted to move from Georgia to White Plains, New York. But I ended up getting in a car accident and my whole life changed and we ended up moving back to Atlanta. But so just to hear that just kind of threw me off. All right, you know what I mean? That was crazy. Sorry, I had to tell y'all that though.
He had dreams of becoming a reporter and worked 2 jobs to try to pay for college. He was also planning a wedding to a woman he'd met in White Plains. In December of 1974, Oscar's nephew, Joshua Fluellen, arrived in town and was looking for a place to stay. Oscar let Fluellen stay in his apartment. On January 1st, he received a call from his sister, saying Fluellen was on the run after escaping from jail. She advised him to kick Fluellen out. It was the last time anybody saw or heard from him. A week later, Oscar's family decided to contact authorities and report him missing. The authorities found clear signs of a violent crime at Oscar's apartment, but no sign of him or Fluellen. Fluellen would be arrested a few weeks later, but he claimed to have no idea what happened to his uncle. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, 2 hunters made a disturbing discovery. They were in an area of Piedmont near Highway 20 when they spotted what looked like a piece of plastic smoldering. When they approached, they discovered that the plastic was covering human remains. They contacted authorities who retrieved the body. The man had many blunt force wounds, but the police weren't able to specify what exactly had been the cause of his passing. The body was labeled as Mr. X, and he was listed as a John Doe. He was wearing a shirt with the name of the New York company Kimco on it, but that didn't help investigators put an identity to the young man. Investigators at the time believed that the crime might have had something to do with illegal substances, but there was no evidence saying this was the case. For years, both cases went cold. Police in New York found little evidence in Oscar's case. The lead investigator, Austin Avery, quit the force so he could focus all his attention on trying to solve the case. He was unhappy with the way Oscar's case had been handled. In particular, he wasn't pleased that he hadn't been allowed to go to New Mexico and interview Fluellen after Fluellen was arrested and imprisoned for unrelated crimes. For decades, Detective Avery continued to work the case with the support of Oscar's family, but nothing came of it. He passed away in 2012 without the case ever being solved. In 2020, the case of Mr. X gained new attention after being featured on a true crime podcast. His case was re-examined by the cold case unit, and his remains were exhumed. DNA was entered into the NamUs database, and in 2024, the police announced they had a match. Mr. X was identified as Oscar Ned. It's assumed that Oscar was attacked at his apartment and then transported to South Carolina. With Oscar's body and story now put together, it now seems possible that the case will be completely solved very soon.
When we gonna learn? And I do say I'm including myself into that. When we gonna learn? It's not the people out in the street all the time that's gonna get to us. It's the ones next to us that we allow and we drop our guard down and let them get close to us. And their intentions don't be good. When are we gonna learn that lesson? It's a hard one, I know, and I struggle with it just as much as some of y'all do, bro. We trying to do right by our family. Let me do that again. We trying to do right by our family. And those be the ones that take us out. That's crazy, bro. You helping out your own nephew. And he possibly is the one that possibly took that man out. Shout outs to DNA, man, for being able to use DNA nowadays. A lot of cases they're starting to solve because they're able to use and look at the DNA now.
Number 4. There are few locations on Earth that are surrounded by as many mysteries as the Great Pyramid of Giza. For thousands of years, it stood as the tallest man-made structure on Earth and remains one of the wonders of the world. Built between 2551 and 2528 BC, it was constructed for the second pharaoh of Egypt's 4th dynasty, Khufu, and is believed to have once housed his remains. But when the inner chambers of the pyramid were explored, only the empty sarcophagus of Khufu was uncovered. For decades, Egyptologists have assumed that Khufu's remains were removed in antiquity and are now lost forever. But the mystery may one day be solved. Across Egypt and other ancient sites, modern archaeologists frequently come across the problem of burial chambers and similar locations being robbed in antiquity. It was a significant problem in ancient Egypt, which may have been part of the reason why pharaohs decided to move their final resting places to less obvious locations. When Khufu's sarcophagus was located in the so-called King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid, it was assumed that this is what had happened. The granite itself had been left behind, possibly because it was too heavy for the thieves to move. The mummy may have been removed by people trying to preserve the remains and hidden in another tomb somewhere. But it's also likely that the remains were stolen for the precious items that were sometimes buried with them. It was a disappointing conclusion for Egyptologists to draw. There are many mysteries about this ancient ruler, who would have lived over 4,400 years ago. There are few sources about his life and what he was like as a ruler, leaving behind unanswered questions about what Egypt was like during this period. We also don't know how exactly he passed away, something that could possibly be resolved if his mummy's remains are to be located. But in 2004, 2 French amateur Egyptologists gave hope that the remains could still one day be found. There are 3 known chambers within the Great Pyramid of Giza. The highest chamber is the King's Chamber, and it was here where the sarcophagus was buried. Granite beams make up the ceiling, protecting the chamber from the weight of the stone above. Much closer to the ground is the Queen's Chamber. Rather than being the burial place for a queen, it was used to store many of the treasures that Khufu was buried with. The final chamber is subterranean and wasn't completed at the time of Khufu's passing. There were signs that there was a secret chamber beneath the Queen's Chamber. They suggested that the interior of the pyramid hadn't been planned to be the way it was, but the result of trial and error. There are cracks in the beams above the King's Chamber. The official understanding is that these were created by an earthquake made not long after the pyramid was built. Researchers believe the cracks were formed due to the weight of the stone above, and a new burial chamber had to be made. Ground-penetrating radar allegedly showed signs of a passageway leading down from the Queen's Chamber, which is located in the center of the pyramid when viewed from above. This would be much more symbolic of a place for the pharaoh to have been buried. If they're right, it's possible that King Khufu's remains are still there, undisturbed. But permission has not been granted for exploration to take place, and many Egyptologists are skeptical that this mysterious 4th chamber even exists. Number 3. Acquired Savant syndrome is a strange phenomenon and medical mystery that has baffled doctors for decades. Only a handful of people have ever been recognized as having the condition, so trying to figure out what causes it is even more difficult than what might be typically the case. In 2002, 32-year-old Jason Paget was attacked outside of a bar in Tacoma, Washington. During the attack, he was hit on the back of the head and suffered a concussion. He was taken to the hospital, but he didn't seem to be in too much trouble, and Jason was sent home that same night. Even though there didn't seem to be much physically wrong with him, Jason's entire view of the world changed. Jason had dropped out of high school early and had never taken much of an interest in subjects like math. Now he was seeing tangent lines and geometric shapes when he did something as simple as turn on the tap to get a glass of water. At first, he thought it was a side effect of the medication he was taking for pain, but it continued. Jason had developed a sudden understanding of mathematics and fractals. It helped him to cope with the OCD that had also been triggered by the attack. He would spend hours drawing circles and geometric shapes and trying to understand the universe through his new knowledge. During his research, Jason came across scientists studying acquired Savant syndrome. The condition described people who were suddenly geniuses after suffering from some kind of brain damage.
Whoa. This sounds like the movie Limitless, except in that movie they took a pill and you just tapped into everything your brain had acquired knowledge-wise, and you could consume information that makes you. But this is something totally different. So does that pose the question that we're all, which I think we're all geniuses, we just don't know how to unlock those parts of the brain? We need to do more studies on the brain, fam. And imagine the things we could unlock and do. This is beyond crazy, but I've always thought about something like this though.
That would come in the form of a head wound, as was the case for Jason, or an illness that impacted the brain, like meningitis. When Jason underwent an MRI scan, doctors found that a part of his brain that the conscious mind doesn't typically have access to, and the visual cortex, seemed to be connected to the part of the brain that does mathematics. The way the human brain works is often simplified, but the different hemispheres of the brain are responsible for different things. Things such as logic and language-based processes take place in the left hemisphere, and creative and artistic processes take place in the right hemisphere. Scientists have speculated that acquired Savant syndrome occurs when these different parts of the brain interact in ways they hadn't previously, but how and why this happens is unclear. There are two main theories about why this happens. The first is a chemical process. When cells inside the brain are damaged, they leak the hormone serotonin into the surrounding tissue. This could cause growth in these areas, which then leads to a connection between different types of the brain. The second theory is more destructive. It speculates that the left hemisphere of the brain is typically more dominant because it's more important for decision making. In a way, it drowns out the messages and signals sent by the more creative side of the brain. When the left side of the brain becomes damaged, it allows the right side to flourish and develop. Of course, not everyone who has suffered a major knock to the head has developed acquired Savant syndrome. It's exceptionally rare, with only around 50 cases known around the world. It's possible that the condition is more common, but it simply hasn't been recognized yet. Scientists are still uncertain whether this is down to chance, or if there's some genetic predisposition that means some are more likely to develop the mysterious condition than others. Number 2. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 is officially classed as the only large commercial aircraft to go missing in U.S. history. The plane disappeared over Lake Michigan in 1950, and only scraps of debris have been recovered. What exactly happened to the flight remains a mystery, though investigators have their ideas about the likely answer to this unsolved case. The flight was a regular trip between New York and Seattle, with a stop in Minneapolis. Pilot Robert Lind had made the journey countless times before without incident. His co-pilot was Vern Wolf, who had plenty of experience. Neither pilot could have imagined anything would be different as they ran through their pre-flight checks at LaGuardia Airport that evening. There were some storms due over the Great Lakes area, which wasn't too uncommon, and the pilots tried to arrange their flight paths to avoid them. Lind requested a cruising altitude of 4,000 feet, rather than the 600 feet he'd been assigned. At first, he was denied the request, but this was later approved. At 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, the plane took off with 55 passengers on board. As well as the two pilots, there was also one stewardess, Bonnie Ann Feldman, on board. The first 4 hours of the flight took place without issue. At roughly 11:30, air traffic control requested the plane drop to an altitude of 3,500 feet. Lind brought the plane down to the correct altitude and carry on. At 11:51 p.m., Lind requested that he bring the plane further down to 2,000 feet, but air traffic control denied this as there were other flights at that level. This would be the last time anybody heard from the aircraft. It was a little over an hour later when the plane was reported as missing. Multiple aviation radio stations in the area tried to contact the flight, but got no response. The following morning, the search for Flight 2501 over Lake Michigan began. Thousands of boats and many planes have met their end over Lake Michigan, in a region that's been dubbed the Michigan Triangle. For most of those, bad weather is the obvious explanation for what happened. That seems to have been the case here too. There was an electrical storm in the region. Witnesses in nearby towns reported hearing the sound of an engine sputtering and strange yellow lights trailing one of the wings. Some thought the pilot was looking for a place to land, but the plane continued over Lake Michigan before a strange light was seen. About 13 hours after the start of the search, an oil slick was discovered in Lake Michigan. Over the following days, small pieces of debris were located, including fragments of human remains, but nothing very large was found. It was impossible for investigators to determine what had happened to the plane. Some speculated that there'd been an accident in the air, which destroyed the plane before it ever hit the water. Others have speculated that winds caused the plane to turn over, and the pilot wasn't high enough to recover the plane before it hit the water. But if witnesses are to be believed, the incident wasn't sudden, which makes the lack of a radio call for help even stranger. More than half a century on, an annual search for the plane at the bottom of Lake Michigan was started. No sign of Flight 2501 has ever been located, but the search teams have found many missing ships, some dating back to the 1800s while dredging along the muddy lake bed. Number 1. Trisha Meredith was just beginning a new chapter of her life when she was violently attacked in the laundry room of her apartment complex. The criminal responsible has managed to keep their identity a mystery for decades, but Trisha's family and investigators still hope the case might one day be solved. April 7th of 1986 was a pleasant spring day in Indianapolis, Indiana. There were lots of people out enjoying the weather that Monday evening. Trisha and her boyfriend David were doing household chores. It was just a few weeks after they'd moved in together. At 19, this was Trisha's first time living away from home. She'd met her boyfriend at the store they both worked at, and loved ones described the relationship as very loving. Even though they hadn't been in a relationship very long, it seemed like the right time to move in together. Trisha had also recently started a new job as a stock clerk, and both of them appeared to be happy. At about 6 p.m., Trisha and David took their clothes down to the laundry room attached to the Spring Hill apartment complex. They piled the clothes into a washer and started the cycle, which lasted between 25 and 30 minutes. At about 6:15, David left the laundry room and went back to their apartment to make a call to his grandmother. At 6:45, he returned. At first, he couldn't see Trisha, but he quickly realized something was wrong. There were red stains on some of the machines, and coming from the utility closet. He found Trisha inside with multiple wounds from a bladed weapon. David called Trisha's mother, who called the police. By the time police arrived, David had moved Trisha to lie on the laundry room floor. It was immediately clear to the police that this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. They could also see that Trisha had tried to fight off her attacker, and had even tried to hide behind one of the washers to get away from him. Two men who were playing golf nearby reported hearing screaming coming from the direction of the apartment building but didn't go to investigate. The police were able to narrow down the time for the attack to between 6:30 and 6:40.
So people nearby could hear it, but the boyfriend upstairs calling the grandma couldn't hear it? Or maybe, I don't know, that just seems a little bit, that stands out to me at first a little bit.
Trisha's laundry had been moved from the washer to the dryer, meaning the first laundry cycle had ended by the time the attack took place. David was initially investigated, but phone records showed that he'd been on a call with his grandmother from 6:17 to 6:42, giving him an alibi for the time the attack occurred. Investigators had two potential suspects in the case, both of them neighbors who reported being in the laundry room the day of the attack. One lived opposite the apartment complex, and had even offered to let the police use his phone early in the investigation. He seemed very interested in the case, and it later emerged that he had audio recording devices so that he could keep up with the investigation. He even told coworkers that he had taken Trisha's life, but said that he'd just done that for attention. Unfortunately, because the attack had been in a communal area, finding DNA at the crime scene wouldn't necessarily mean a suspect was behind the crime. Hundreds of pieces of evidence were collected, including fingerprints on Trisha's body, but so far this hasn't led to any arrests. Trisha's parents passed away not long after she did, and her younger brother passed away in 2012. Her sister and investigators continue to search for answers to this unsolved mystery. A $1,000 reward was offered for information leading to an arrest, and anybody with information in this case should contact Crime Stoppers on 317-262-8477 or IMPD's Cold Case Squad at 317-327-3426.